Recessions, which are economic downturns, are inevitable. Recessions and job layoffs go hand in hand. The issue is whether or not certain protected groups bear a disproportionate burden during the layoff phase of a recession and the later rehiring phase of a recession. For instance, 50% of a company's employees are women, but 80% of the employees laid off are women. This could raise red flags that the layoffs were biased against female employees. Or 10% of a company's employees are black, but 50% of the employees laid off are black. This could raise red flags that the layoffs were biased against black employees. Furthermore, if women were rehired during the recovery at a slower rate than men, this could raise red flags that the rehiring was biased against female employees. If blacks were rehired during the recovery at a slower rate than whites, this could raise red flags that the rehiring was biased against black employees. This layoff and rehiring scenario happens to a variety of protected groups, such as women, older workers, people of color, the disabled, and members of the LGBTQ+ community. Employers have been known to target these groups during economic downturns by laying off these employees at a disproportionately higher rate and then rehiring them at a disproportionately slower rate. In other words, employers use downturns in the economy as a pretext for unlawful discriminatory conduct. Coined after the financial crisis in 2008, the term recessionary discrimination describes employers who disproportionately lay off workers who should otherwise be protected, such as pregnant women. Employers have targeted their most vulnerable employees, such as women, older workers, people of color, the disabled, and members of the LGBTQ+ community. During the next economic downturn, as is traditionally the case, blacks and Hispanics will be laid off at a disproportionately higher rate and rehired at a disproportionately slower rate. Older employees, particularly women, will be laid off at a disproportionately higher rate allegedly because of their higher salaries. And during the rehiring phase, younger employees will be rehired at a disproportionately high rate than older workers. Disabled employees will be laid off at a disproportionately higher rate allegedly because many are now working remotely while their co-workers have returned to the office. According to a Forbes article, dated November 18, 2022, another round of recessionary discrimination looms. Generally, layoffs which are not based on any objective criteria and are based solely on the discretion of managers are susceptible to discriminatory decision-making because of actual or implicit biases that may exist. Given that evaluations and ratings are typically subjective, for example, selecting workers for reduction based on prior performance reviews may have an unintended discriminatory result. In situations where an employee has made a complaint of discrimination in the past, instances where an individual who was the subject of the complaint had any input in the decision to include the employee in the round of layoffs would be a common form of recessionary discrimination. Recent trends have shown that the unemployment rate of African Americans rises faster than the unemployment rate of Caucasians during recessions. Moreover, once the economic recovery begins, the unemployment rates for Caucasians begins to fall sooner than that of African Americans. During times of recession, more victims of discrimination are likely to come forward. If you're in a protected class based on your age, sex, national origin, religion, or race, or if you have a disability, and you can prove that you were laid off from work because of it, then you may have a legitimate case. When attempting to prove a discriminatory layoff occurred, look for the following: the involvement of a manager or managers in the layoff selection process who have a history of discriminatory behavior. A history within the company of discriminatory behavior, such as unequal pay and bias in hiring and promotions. Bias and inconsistency in the decision-making process regarding who would be laid off. The use of statistics such as are protected groups disproportionately impacted by the layoffs. You may also contact the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission to file a complaint. The agency states the following: before implementing a layoff or reduction in force RIF, review the process to determine if it will result in the disproportionate dismissal of older employees, employees with disabilities, or any other group protected by federal employment discrimination laws. Federal laws that prohibit discrimination include Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits companies from making employment decisions based on race, religion, sex, pregnancy, or national origin. Title I and Title V of the Americans with Disability Act of 1990 prohibits employment discrimination against those with disabilities. The Age Discrimination in Employment Act of 1967 protects workers 40 and older.